Redditors who voted to leave the EU and still believe this is the right choice. What is your reasoning? I voted leave fundamentally because I don't want to be part of an ever closer union. I want to continue as the United Kingdom. I don't want to be part of the potential disaster that is the euro. Surprise surprise. A common currency across massively different cultures and economics doesn't work. You need a single taxation and spending policy. I don't want to be part of a European armed forces. NATO works just fine and we have the independence to send our military where we want. I want my laws to be set and judged by UK politicians, as bad as they are, and UK judges, who have similar cultural values as me. I have certainly sent more letters to my 10 MEPs. How does that work BTW? Complaining about upcoming laws than I have to my local MP. I hate waste. I know who my MP is. I can speak to them whenever I want and directly influence the politics that impact me. Why do we need another government above that? Why do people I have little to no say on get to enjoy crazy salaries and spend their days smashed out of their face? Whose genius idea was it to pack up office and go to France every few weeks? Why does someone else get to decide how the UK spends its money? EU aid to countries such as Poland. We don't have full control over that. Everything takes forever to agree. The EU is huge and largely decentralized. This means everything takes time to agree, be that trade agreements or action to urgent matters such as migration crisis. Eastern countries will usually disagree with Western countries as everyone has their own priorities and culture. If the UK has a different position to most of the EU, the UK loses out. I'd rather the UK was dynamic, flexible, and if it wants to give state aid. I like the idea of free movement, but it doesn't work when you have large differences in economics. Poland has lost a lot of educated individuals. How is that fair? Why shouldn't Europeans receive beneficial treatment for right to work? I would rather people were allowed to live in the UK based on skill set and need. For example, why should an average doctor from Germany get easier access to the UK than the best doctor in India? Surely we want the best no matter where they are from. I know it is my job to learn about the EU. I studied a module on EU law during my degree and I've watched the BBC documentaries on how the EU operates, but its image is awful. The impression I get is that it is too big to really be able to represent the UK's best interests at all times. It has too many things to juggle and keep everyone happy. That's simply not possible. I did not vote to leave because I thought I would instantly get £1 million in my bank account. I do not hate anyone who doesn't speak English, and I do not blame every issue in the UK on the EU. I voted to avoid the EU's ever closer union, an aim baked into the very DNA of the project and something that seems desired by most politicians in the EU 27. I believe power is best when it is as close to the people as possible and I have more democratic influence as 1 in 66 million than 1 in 500 million. The common response is that the UK would not be forced into ever closer union, which is true, but our politicians don't exactly like consulting us on this. We signed the Maastricht and Lisbon treaties without a referendum despite significant public and political opposition. You can't reclaim powers that have been handed over to the EU while remaining a member, and I don't trust the British political class not to integrate further, so I'd rather leave now than after a few more decades of integration. I was pro-EEA when I voted, but have not appreciated the EU's negotiating attitude of agree to hand over customs control of Northern Ireland and billions of pounds you don't legally owe. Then I guess we'll talk about what you want. I believe this was an attempt to force us into choosing no deal or no Brexit and hoping we pick the latter. I would rather leave the bloc entirely at this point and pivot our economy away from Europe, leaving us less affected by their next inevitable economic crisis and having our regulations tailored entirely to our economy. Free movement disadvantages the British working class as it makes them compete with unlow-skilled workers from the entire continent. People who can make a lot more money in the UK than they can in their own countries, so have a strong incentive to do so. Limiting this immigration will mean there are fewer workers, which has already led to wage increases for those jobs. Also, it just doesn't feel right to me that a French waiter can move here with no problems but a Japanese engineer has to jump through countless hoops. I am incredibly disappointed by how British politicians have handled this. Both leave us for having rigid red lines and no clear plan, and Remainers for fighting for a referendum are unfrustrating attempts to plan for no deal. The withdrawal agreement was insane. I mean, seriously, how do you react to a referendum that calls for restored sovereignty with a deal that keeps the UK essentially in the EU until the EU agrees it can leave and expect it to be acceptable to anyone? I was hoping the House of Commons would respect the referendum and settle on a EEA compromise, but I was wrong. I was hoping the EU would treat the UK as an equal and attempt to build a new relationship, but I was wrong. I was and am completely out of touch with the British and European political classes and won't be voting for a while. The Brexit process has been completely fumbled, but if we don't leave now, then the last 3 years will be the horror story that keeps us in forever. My core ideology on the issue has not changed from 2016, so I still believe the UK should not be a member of the EU. To me, it feels like a lot of people were voting to say they never wanted to be in the EU, for many of the reasons above, but didn't understand the reality of what trying to leave the EU at this point was going to mean. The saddest thing for me is how much resource and time we have wasted on Brexit as a country, and how better that could have been spent. My dad voted leave specifically because of your first point. I was too young to vote in 2016, but if I wasn't, then I would have voted to leave because I disagree with the further federalization and integration of the EU. I didn't mind when it was simply a common economic market, but since the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 and the Lisbon Treaty in 2007, it is increasingly moving towards becoming a political project. I have nothing against the rest of Europe, but I do not want my country to just be a state within a future United States of Europe. The Remain camp claim that this fear is just based on conspiracy theories, even though many top EU officials have stated on record that this is a goal that they are aiming for, or at the very least something that they support in principle. I would prefer if we leave with a deal, but I think that exiting on WTO terms would ultimately be better for us in the long term than revoking Article 50. I disagree with what it has become. It works as a federal government with states. It has way overstepped its original remit of being a trade bloc. Doing things like forcing Poland to accept refugees, while probably morally correct, is not a decision for a trading organization to make. It's for the people of that country. I do think we'd be better off economically in the EU. I just think that over the years it has gradually crept from a trade bloc to federal government. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, it has grown past being a trade bloc. It actually didn't really originate as a trade bloc either. It was a project to integrate and intertwine economic and infrastructure so that it both fostered cooperation, familiarity and interdependence to prevent conflict in a region that had just gone through 2 catastrophic wars in 30 years. It has also evolved into an organization, and this was heavily shaped by the UK, that upholds ostensibly Western liberal values like the rule of law and democracy. To use Poland as an example again, they've been warned by the EU for moves it's made that could weaken or corrupt the court system, which I would think we could all agree is a good thing. I guess I just disagree with the premise of its doing things a trade bloc shouldn't, as I don't think the EU was ever only a trade bloc to begin with. Thank you for this comment. The idea of the EU has always been to prevent another European war. In the UK, nobody seems to think of that, in contrast to Germany, France or Poland for example. I voted to remain. At this point I just want out. People voted to leave, and if we don't, it completely goes against the basic rules of living in a democracy. I can't understand how people can be okay with not leaving after a vote that was equally as fair and lied about as every single election that has ever taken place in this country. I accept that there were lies told during the months before the vote, but isn't there in every election? We'd have to wipe every MP and PM from history if we overturned referendum results based on lies in the run-up the vote. Most people only turned against the result when they realized their yearly trip to Spain will cost more. I voted to stay, but now I want to leave. There's an image of every Brexit voter being a racist skinhead, but there's nothing wrong in having a better control over your borders. We shouldn't be forced to take in more migrants. Trade income might be better within the EU, but we will have more freedom of lawmaking as well and wouldn't have to follow EU jurisdiction. A lot of people voted Remain, myself included, because Britain should be part of Europe, but it's not like we'll be leaving Europe lol. The only reason why I would vote Remain now is because of the freedom of movement, but that's about it really. They say leaving Europe instead of leaving the EU. It's very clever use of words to try deflect from the political side of things. Dear friend, what do you think about the Brexit? Share your opinion with us and don't forget to subscribe to join our small team.